Godzilla, Marvel Comics, Doctor Demonicus mutant. This version of Godzilla once grabbed Iron Man's discarded armor mid-battle and handed it to his captor like an offering, and the fact that a mind-controlled monster would make that kind of tactical decision is the first clue that something was still operating beneath the surface-level control. The series that delivered this moment ran 24 issues across 1977 and 1979 under the title Godzilla, King of the Monsters, written by Doug Moench and primarily drawn by Herb Trimpe, a run long enough to build a complete ecosystem around its version of the character. The figure controlling that version was Doctor Demonicus, born Douglas Burley, a geneticist whose own research exposed him to enough radioactivity to contract a rare cancer and cost him his position entirely. His experiments led to the creation of mutated monsters he could control. His first appearance was in Godzilla, King of the Monsters #4, 1977. The monsters under his command included Batragon, Gilaron, and Centaur. Godzilla's first major public breach under that control came when he attacked an Avengers Quinjet, the kind of incident that forced Iron Man to the South Pacific stronghold for a direct confrontation. That confrontation is where the handoff happens. Iron Man fights, armor gets damaged, Godzilla picks it up and carries it to Demonicus, who uses it to escape before being captured himself. And that is the small version of the problem. Because once you look at the scope Dr. Demonicus had built, the real question isn't whether a mind-controlled Godzilla can act intelligently. It's why S.H.I.E.L.D. witnessed the defeat of multiple named creatures at the stronghold, Gilaron, Centaur, the others, with Godzilla's help while he was supposedly a fully subjugated asset. The operation had demon soldiers deployed across an undersea facility complex, multiple genetically altered creatures under single-point command, and enough operational scale to prompt direct Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. intervention. A watchdog that helps take down your own forces on the day of a critical battle isn't a watchdog. It's a double agent that hasn't decided which side it's on yet. Defenders of this version point immediately to the mind control. Godzilla was captured, further mutated, and kept on a mental leash. Whatever he did under that leash wasn't really him. That argument falls apart the moment you account for the armor handoff. A creature acting purely under another's will doesn't pause mid-conflict to identify a discarded piece of technology, evaluate its strategic value, and deliver it to a specific individual across a battlefield. That requires three things Demonicus's control demonstrably did not account for: pattern recognition, delayed tactical assessment, and intent directed at a specific beneficiary. Godzilla was in that stronghold. He was aware of what was happening. And when the moment came to decide who walked out of there with the advantage, he chose Demonicus, the man who had captured and mutated him, over Iron Man, the man actively trying to stop Demonicus. That's not a puppet performing a command. That's a monster calculating who benefits more from the chaos. Dr. Demonicus was captured after the confrontation. God Demon. If the Marvel version of Godzilla was a monster operating under someone else's remote control from a facility nobody was likely to find, the God Demon in IDW's Godzilla in Hell issue #5 from 2015 was a guardian standing between Godzilla and the surface of the living world itself, positioned at the threshold rather than hidden beneath it. Writer Dave Wachter designed it as a massive, almost cephalopod-shaped entity mostly concealed by cloud cover, with very little of its form visible at any given moment. A large rounded head ringed with multiple eyes, tentacles surrounding a mouthful of sharp fangs, skin described as grayish with a decayed, uneven texture and spikes sprouting from its surface. The tentacles were long, their undersides scaly like a snake's, and they bore sucker pods that divided their dorsal and ventral sides. Godzilla encountered it at the absolute end of his journey through hell, his last and most powerful challenge before returning to the living world, atop a mountain where the god demon served as the guardian of a Torii Gate, the structure that marked the passage between realms. The battle opened with the god demon summoning a landslide to knock Godzilla down from the mountain, a direct demonstration of geokinesis, earth manipulation applied with enough force to topple the king of monsters from his own approach. Godzilla's path to this confrontation had already rewritten the rules of what he was. He had been devoured to the bone by Hellbats earlier in his descent, and had responded by possessing them, reconstructing his physical form from the swarm rather than dying. When he reassembled himself that way, the god demon clearly had no framework for what it was looking at. Godzilla destroyed it with a single amplified atomic breath emitted by all the Hellbats now forming his body, a blast built from the damned themselves, fired through the last possible configuration of a monster that had already died once in hell and refused to stay dead. Dave Wachter described the god demon's nature as deliberately ambiguous. It could have been a demon, a devil, or something else entirely. The writing leaves that question open, but the position it occupied, the last obstacle before exit, the guardian at the boundary between the underworld and everything else, suggests it was something placed there on purpose, something that had never failed before because nothing had ever made it that far through hell alive. Godzilla didn't just pass it, he destroyed it with the power of the creatures that had consumed him, using their mass as his weapon, their bodies as his flesh, their collected energy as his breath. The implication the facts force is this: whatever was waiting on the other side of that Torii gate had been holding the line for a very long time against threats that did not include a monster capable of dying, being eaten, reconstituting himself from his devourers, and coming back with everything he needed to burn through a guardian that had never encountered resistance before. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which demonic Godzilla incarnation you think was the most fitting. Let's get back into it. Shin Godzilla. The last threat was designed, then failed, by the hand of a single creator. This time, the horror comes from something that refuses to be directed by anyone, on or off screen. In 2016, Toho unleashed Shin Godzilla, a kaiju that doesn't just devastate, it evolves as it destroys, mutating through forms faster than anyone can understand, let alone fight. This is not the Godzilla that slows down for tanks or talks with monsters. This is a relentless, mutating catastrophe, and the only thing constant is escalation. The details are uncomfortably precise. Shin Godzilla, also known as Godzilla Resurgence during its initial English release window, is a film credited to directors Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi. Released in 2016, the film refuses familiarity from the first scene. The audience is given a Godzilla that grows not just in power but in bodily form, evolving new abilities within a single rampage. Every transformation is presented with mutated tissue, blood, and an evolving form that defies easy understanding. Nothing here is symbolic or dignified, it's all raw biological threat, every stage more bizarre and malicious than the last. Viewers track a creature capable of both learning and adapting more rapidly than any government response. In scenes throughout the film, Shin Godzilla visibly mutates and unleashes waves of destruction. The specifics are meticulous. The directors insisted on practical effects blended with cutting-edge digital work, aiming for an ugly, clinical realism that never lets the audience look away. Every statistic is moved to the background, replaced with visuals that hammer home just how unknowable and ever-changing this incarnation truly is. All of that leads to one detail the film never lets you forget. Shin Godzilla is not just a new monster, it is an event that keeps rewriting its own rules. Existing defenses, traditional strategies, even past Godzilla logic, none of it works. At the very height of disaster, with buildings and society itself deforming, the kaiju freezes mid-mutation. No one knows if it is truly dead, or if it might start up again in a form nobody is prepared for. Shin Godzilla is interpreted as a metaphor for disaster response and rapid adaptation, capturing chaos and the overwhelming nature of crisis. The textbook reading says it is just an allegory, a mirror of contemporary fears and inefficient bureaucracy. And yet none of that tells us what comes next. The film ends with a question mark. If evolution is endless, can there ever be a final form? Or is Shin Godzilla simply waiting to become something worse? Something no planner, no precedent, and certainly no official manual will ever predict. Evolved Godzilla, Godzilla Earth. The last Godzilla broke the system by changing faster than any response. This time, evolution never had a finish line in the first place. The so-called rule of a final form was never real, and the franchise's most monstrous Godzilla proves it. Godzilla Earth, from the 2017-2018 anime trilogy, is a hyper-evolved, plant-based life form that adapts over a geological timescale. Godzilla Earth measures 50 meters and 10,000 metric tons in 2030, and over 20,000 years, it grows to 300 meters and 100,000 metric tons. 5-digit tonnage shatters Godzilla records, but mass is only the start. By 2048, humanity chooses to evacuate Earth and sets course to Taui in the Cetus constellation. This should be the end, but the logic breaks in the home stretch. When humans return to Earth, 20,000 years have passed and they find Godzilla has become the planet's dominant being. That's when everything resets. No escalation by defense or new form can challenge Godzilla Earth, which remains the dominant fixture. It's tempting to say maybe humanity miscalculated, or to argue this is still just the ultimate evolution of a monster who got lucky. But to believe that, you'd have to imagine some world where retreat buys time, where the monster plateaus and the rules of biology check its power. Those conditions never arrive. Godzilla Earth continues to grow and dominate the planet even after 20,000 years. The line that gets repeated every time the credits roll? When Godzilla evolves without limit, the rules change, and so does everything that survives. Godzilla Ultima. The last Godzilla might have become the planet's apex plant, but only in singular point does Godzilla finish the job by ending the world outright. Godzilla Ultima arrives not as some apex predator, but as a literal apocalypse loaded into an evolving reptilian chassis, and whether you watched it or not, Ultima's escalation isn't subtle. By episode 10, the laws of causality are out the window and the seas are turning red. Ultima is the endpoint of a four-stage metamorphosis that breaks the usual Toho pattern. It doesn't simply rise from the depths, it crawls up through science fiction body horror, tearing its way from Godzilla Aquatilis into Amphibia, through Terrestris, and only then unveiling Ultima, the apocalyptic monster. There's no waiting until the finale. His final form stands over 100 meters tall by episode 10, leading the city-level catastrophe instead of just starring in it. The production doesn't play coy about symbolism. Ultima is presented as an apocalyptic force within the narrative. Ultima is more than a monster. It's the prophecy that's been hanging like a storm over Negatio legend, the monster whose arrival marks world's end when the oceans run red. The specifics read like a checklist for disaster. Ultima's length, 50 meters at emergence, but toweringly vertical by its rampage, drives the first wave of panic. Even forced to evolve by a direct bombing run, it pivots from adaptation under attack to unleashing devastating power. By Singular Point's 13th episode, nothing is left in doubt. When Godzilla Ultima appears, it is to finish the apocalypse that everyone else merely hinted at. Even its written name, carrying the suggestion of finality, is a warning label. Ultima is designed to be recognizable and mythic at the same time, the work of Eiji Yamamori and Yuji Kaneko, and the storytelling impulse draws on Toenjo's influence, not an origin, but a countdown. Nobody in the show, fan or researcher, manages to fully explain the real scope of Godzilla Ultima's existence as an extra-dimensional hazard. The scientific minds paddle through theoretical frameworks and parallel possibilities, always a few frames of analysis behind as the episode count ticks upward and disaster escalates ahead of comprehension. That's the pivot that even experts in-universe struggle with. What exactly does apocalypse mean on a kaiju scale? Obliteration, reset, or something that runs deeper? The best minds in Singular Point can only offer pieces of the answer, speculating about the signals and signatures, groping for cause and effect as an ancient myth physically manifests in the form of a reptilian titan that exceeds every frame of standard Godzilla logic. It's not merely the size or destructiveness, but the fundamental incompatibility. Ultima's mere existence rewrites reality for everyone watching, inside and outside the show. If earlier incarnations of Godzilla were disasters to endure or threats to survive, Godzilla Ultima is the proof that this category of monster can be the full stop for an entire reality, an apocalypse machine that isn't content to conquer its domain, but instead stands as the final term in the franchise's built-in logic of escalation. The myth of Godzilla as living extinction-level event turns literal, and Ultima is what that looks like when storytellers finally take the rules they set up to their logical, disastrous extreme. GMK Godzilla. Singular Point might have dropped one city off the map, but the Godzilla of GMK is punishment for a country's entire past. In the 2001 film Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, Godzilla's very existence is a curse. Not a mutated lizard, not an ancient apex predator, but the walking collective wrath of Pacific War victims, rising up as a supernatural onryo to devastate the nation in living memory. This Godzilla is anchored to a single, searing motive. It hunts Japan's forgetting. As the story makes brutally clear, this is a Godzilla that scales not to the threat of technology or science, but to the unresolved trauma and guilty silence festering underneath. Direction from Shusuke Kaneko and writing that cuts against the grain of every previous incarnation make GMK Godzilla unrecognizable in intent. Where most kaiju hold on to some stray scrap of animal logic or unknowable instinct, this Godzilla is something else. A grudge with a pulse, animated by the spirits of those lost in World War II's Pacific theater. The prophet Hirotoshi Isayama summons Baragon, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, the guardian monsters, to try to bar its path, but the imbalance of power is absolute. GMK Godzilla destroys its would-be equals in unambiguous succession, ignoring pleas, overwhelming defenses, standing unconcerned as legends break before it. There is no moment of mercy, no hint of hesitation. The stakes are complete erasure, not just for those who fight, but for the entire memory of the war dead. Every attack in this story underscores a refusal to let the past be forgotten. Even when its body is destroyed, GMK Godzilla's heart remains on the sea floor, still beating. Supporters of earlier Godzilla incarnations argue that the franchise always positioned him as a walking disaster or even a symbol of hope in later eras, and in many films, that reading fits. But nothing in the earlier or later entries provides a counterweight to GMK's fundamental hostility. The change isn't moral ambiguity, it's the elevation of memory itself to a battlefield. Any comfort that Godzilla will someday be tamed, buried, or excused is shattered by the clear supernatural message: forget the past, and the past will claw its way back, bigger and more furious than ever. What GMK Godzilla proves is that the engine powering these monsters isn't just mutation or mythos, it's the refusal of history to stay buried. The film's Onryo isn't a clever metaphor or a twist on existing canon, it's a tormented mechanism, one that outlives any battle, feeds on forgetting, and promises that some catastrophes are not only inevitable, but deserved, unless confronted head-on.